makers, welcome to Stab and Stitch. I'm Emily Rasmussen from DIY My Way, and every week I sit down with a project that I've been knitting away on or crocheting or whatever it is I'm doing that week. I do it all. But I sit down and work on my project and tell you a true crime story. And if you're a maker like me and you're interested in true crime, you should go ahead and hit that subscribe button and come every week for our little Stab and Stitch knitting circle of sorts. We'll come up with something cute to call it. I don't know. I like it. Also, go ahead and like it if you like it. Before we get too into it, I did want to tell you guys, so I'm wearing this tank. It's hand knitted. I'm going to try to wear something that I made in every video, but like, how many things have I made? Can I keep up? I'm gonna start wearing beanies at some point. It's okay. So I made this tank. It is actually a test knit for the lovely Miss Molly May of Ponder and Ply. She's amazing to test for. If you get a chance to test for her, like seriously, amazing. Anyway, this is one of the 243 options for the pick and mix vest pattern that she's releasing today. So this is actually the floss tank, and I'll show you, or I'll try to show you, like, sorry for my sweatpants, but like, Molly is amazing. I knit this to be intentionally a little bit low, like I made the straps long so that I could wear it with like a cute bralette, do a little summer booby action. Don't judge me. I haven't weaved in all the ends yet because I'm totally that person when it comes to hand knits. I only weave them in when I'm giving them to other people. But it is super comfy. I'm super excited to be able to start wearing it all the time. So today I am working on my Illusionist infinity scarf. I'm actually getting really close. I'm super excited. But it's in the Hue and Me yarn. I wish I'd grabbed like the whole things to show you guys, but it's in the Seafoam and the Juniper colors. I'm gonna link that in the description box too. But it's one of the patterns that 2 of Wands released in her partnership with Lion Brand, which, like, girl, that's amazing. I am so excited for her. That was so cool that she got to do that. Anyway, so I've been working on this pretty much since election night. It's kind of my stress knit, and now it's like, it's coming along. Okay, so I will shut up now. Let's get into the story. All right, so today we are talking about Dr. Death, AKA Dr. Harold Shipman, AKA Fred. Yeah. He's got a lot of names. Also, there's a couple of Dr. Deaths. If you like Google Dr. Death, there's another one. But I guess it's kind of an easy name for the media to name a serial killer. Anyway, so this doctor killed, they're guessing somewhere around like 200 to 250 people that were his patients. Yeah, we love that, right? I like to look into their backstory. I'm like, what messed you up? Why are you like this? So Fred was born in Manchester, England on January 14th, 1946. His parents were working class. They did well. They were never rich, but they were never poor either. He did all right. He was the second of 4 kids, and he and his mother, Vera, were very, very close. They never really said much about his relationship with his father. Like, he was around, but he just was like, he was there. Fred wasn't his favorite kid. But because he was very close with his mother, he actually developed this like sense of superiority as a child that would make him kind of a loner. He never really had many friends, even as an adult. His mother had lung cancer. She was diagnosed when Fred was a teenager, and he immediately took over her care. He was a mama's boy. He was like, of course I'll take care of you. However, she passed away when Fred was 17. In the late stages of her disease, the doctor would come to their home and administer morphine. That's actually how she died, was like while under morphine, right, that the doctor would give her. Fred was just amazed by this. He was fascinated because he had watched his mother deteriorate and suffer, and then to see all of her pain just like gone like that, that was very interesting to him. That's actually why he chose to go into medicine. So she died in June of 1963. Fred then, he goes and takes the entrance exam to Leeds Medical School, and he fails. It did not go so well for him, but you think about it, a teenager whose mom just died, like, how well do you think they're gonna do on a test like that, right? I don't know. I'm making assumptions here, right? But so then he goes and gets a hospital internship where he works for about 2 years, retakes the entrance exam, and actually does so well that he gets a scholarship. So he went to Leeds School of Medicine and graduated in 1970. When he graduated, he almost immediately started working as a physician. He also, during this time, met his wife-to-be, Primrose. He was 19 years old when he met her, so I guess it would have been right as he was starting medical school. They didn't give a lot of timelines. There's really not a lot of information out there about Primrose, but they did have 2 children together. They got married when Primrose was 17, and was 5 months pregnant with their first child, which in today's world, okay, yep, you got pregnant, you get married, cool. In 1970, it's a little bit more taboo. People really didn't do that. So yeah, it seems to me like it was a little bit of a shotgun wedding. I don't know, he was still a loner. I don't really know how Primrose felt about him. I'm making assumptions here, right? And we can all make our assumptions about it. Tucking in my weaved in end. But, so they get married. He finishes medical school. And when he graduates in 1970, he starts working as a doctor. So in 1974, so fast forward to 1974. At this point, Fred and Primrose had 2 children, and Fred moved to Todmorden, Yorkshire. I probably butchered that. It's fine. So Todmorden, Yorkshire, where he became a general physician at a practice. So this is he made it as a doctor. Okay, you're a GP. You're a big deal. And so yeah, things were going pretty well for him. However, at some point in the year 1974, that's kind of unclear, he became addicted to a painkiller called pethidine. There's not really a lot about this out there either, but he was forging prescriptions for large amounts of this drug. He was caught and forced to leave the practice. Now, we never actually know if he's the one taking the drug or why he's forging these prescriptions, but he did a stint in rehab as part of being forced to leave the practice in 1975. They looked into it further, and he ended up receiving a small fine and a conviction for forgery. So now he's got a record. So after this scandal, Fred and his family moved to Hyde, which is another town in England. So they moved to Hyde, and he's accepted into a medical practice there, where he ended up working for 2 decades. He was a GP there. He was a big deal. He very quickly became trusted by coworkers. He had done really well in medical school. He knew his stuff. And patients too. They loved Dr. Shipman. And at this point, I'm going to switch to calling him Dr. Shipman because he was a doctor. But people seem to think he was really, really good at his job. Great doctor. Everybody loved him. He was still a little bit of a loner, but he was a really good doctor. On June 24th, 1998, Fred had a patient named Kathleen Grundy. And Kathleen Grundy was found dead in her home. Kathleen was 81 at the time, which in 1998, I guess that was 20 years ago. Yikes. But so 20 years ago, dying at 81 wasn't the craziest thing in the world. But Kathleen, she was active. She was in good health. She had been receiving home calls from Dr. Shipman for some time, and had actually had a visit with him that same day that she was found dead. Angela, her daughter, is this is weird. My mother should not have just died, right? So she calls her mother's doctor, Dr. Shipman, and Dr. Shipman's no, it was natural causes. It was just her time. Or at least, I'm paraphrasing what he would have said, right? But he assures Angela that her mother had died of natural causes. She had died peacefully. The best thing to do was to just put her to rest. So Angela, she agrees. She's just traumatized by this whole thing. Her mother has died, right? So her mother's buried. Angela, at this point, was the executor of her mother's estate. She had been for a lot of years. She had power of attorney, all of those things. And so she's going through her mother's affairs, her paperwork, and she's really surprised because she finds a second will that she didn't know about. So they had the will that they had put together and that Angela was aware of. And then there's this new will. And in this new will, it says that her mother is leaving most of her money, a large portion of it, to Dr. Shipman. Uh-huh. And Angela's like, yeah, probably not. Let's figure this out. So she reaches out to the police. She's like, yeah, so this guy said my mother is dead of natural causes, and there's this extra will that I've never heard of that says that her entire estate is getting left to him. I don't think this is real. I think that he murdered my mother and is trying to steal her money. That's what Angela says. And the police look over the evidence and they're like, yeah, that feels right. And they agree with her, right? So the police they exhume Kathleen's body and they do that autopsy that Angela had thought they should do from the beginning, right? And what do you know? The autopsy shows that Kathleen, Mrs. Grundy, had died of an overdose of morphine. Now, Kathleen, she was a relatively healthy 81-year-old woman. She wasn't taking morphine. And the dose had been administered approximately 3 hours before her death, give or take, which actually was coincidentally when she had her appointment that day with Dr. Shipman. Coincidentally. Yeah, so police didn't think this was a coincidence. So they get a warrant and they go ahead and they raid Dr. Shipman's home. From his home, they take a bunch of medical records. They take an old typewriter that they were able to prove later was used to write the forged will, and that was not Kathleen's will that was found. And they find an odd assortment of mismatched but expensive jewelry. So they take all of these things and they're going through these medical records and they realize, oh my God, this is definitely not the first person this guy has intentionally killed. So this was definitely not his first victim. In fact, they believed there were so many victims that they didn't actually need to investigate every single case to get this guy locked up for the rest of his life. I don't know if they have the death penalty in England. If you're from England and you're watching this, let me know in the comments. Like, do they have the death penalty? Is that a thing that you guys do? But anyway, they were like, okay, so we only need to investigate some of these. Like, let's pick the ones we can like definitely prove that he did. So they picked the ones where the victim had not been cremated, because a lot of them had been cremated. Apparently, Dr. Shipman would actually encourage his victims' families to cremate their family member. Yeah, not sketchy at all, right? So they needed some victims who hadn't been cremated so they could exhume the body and do the research on it. And then they also needed victims that had died on the same day that they had a home visit with Dr. Shipman, because that was a little bit easier to link the cause of death to him. So those were the characteristics they looked for, and they end up choosing 15 cases between 1975 and 1998 that they feel that they can like very solidly go after. Now, if you're sitting there and you're thinking like, there is absolutely no way that this man has been killing people since 1975 and no one has caught on, you're right. So if we rewind back to 1975, when Dr. Shipman had just started at this new practice in Hyde, there was a local undertaker that after a year or so started to notice like, hey, this guy's patients die a lot. They died at an unusually high rate. And he was noticing that his patients were often posed really similarly when they were dead, or like in similar positions. Maybe not like posed per se, like he didn't know they were posed, that's, you know, but they were almost always fully clothed. A lot of times they were sitting up, or they were kind of like propped up on furniture, like they had just like died, you know, like it was weird. And it was so weird that he noticed a pattern, right? So he confronted Dr. Shipman about it, but he explained it away. He was like, no, it's nothing, you shouldn't be worried. The undertaker's like, but it didn't go anywhere. So a few years later, his colleague, Dr. Susan Booth, noticed this too. But instead of approaching him the way the undertaker did, she actually notified the police. And the police did a covert investigation. So they investigated Dr. Shipman without him knowing that they were investigating him. However, there's really not much said about this investigation. It actually ended up clearing Shipman of the accusations. They never charged him. However, when they did this, they never actually contacted the General Medical Council, which is like a medical governing body that I learned about. So they never contacted them. They also never checked criminal records. If they had done either of these things, they would have learned about his previous record. They would have learned about, the drug issues, the forgery conviction, etc. But they didn't. So I'm not so sure how thorough I think this covert investigation was. I'll let you make your own assumptions about this covert investigation. Anyway, it was actually later stated that at the time that this investigation closed, if they had actually taken it seriously or done a better job, there were 3 victims that he was convicted of killing. So just the ones he was convicted of that died between when this investigation closed and when he was arrested for the murder of Kathleen Grundy. So there's at least 3 lives that could have been saved if this investigation had been done correctly, if they had contacted the GMC, etc. Okay, so fast forward back to 1998, they're investigating this crime, right? And they choose their 15 that they're gonna go after. And on September 7th, 1998, Dr. Shipman was charged with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. And they go to trial. So honestly, this was a heck of a trial. This went on, and the whole process of this didn't end until 2000. So I don't know how long the actual trial was, but it was not short. They went through every single one of these 15 murders in great detail. And I kind of feel bad for the jury. That's scarring. But so they get started with the trial, and immediately Shipman's lawyers come in and they're like, this isn't 1 case, this is 3 cases. This should be split into cases where we do have physical evidence, cases where we don't have physical evidence. Oh gosh, my yarn split. Okay, sorry. Cases where we don't have physical evidence, and then the Grundy case, which they said should be separate because it also included forgery, which the other ones did not have any forgery charges associated with them. And the judge threw this out. He also threw out their request to disregard some of the more incriminating evidence, such as the drugs that were involved. I think they tried to get it thrown out because it was HIPAA laws and it was somebody's medication, and the judge was like, yeah, no, that's not a thing, because there were a lot of drugs involved that were really not intended for the patients that they were prescribed to. So they go ahead with the trial. So starting with the Grundy case, prosecutors set out to make the point that this man was a cruel, compassionless killer. He enjoyed having power over life and death, is what prosecutors said. They would go on to say that, there was no compassion in what he did. He wasn't trying to put them out of their misery or anything like that. He enjoyed this power and he felt like he was superior. Of course, his defense made the case that, these people were dying, they were terminally ill, something was they were just suffering, and he was doing them a favor. However, this was actually thrown out. There was an objection to this because not a single one of these 15 people had any kind of a terminal or chronic illness. They were just relatively healthy people who died. So they go through, and in the Grundy case, first they bring in a handwriting expert. And they're like, okay, so this signature on the will, and the handwriting expert certifies that it's fake. So there's the forgery charge. Then they start to go through the cases. And they had found some evidence, actually. So they found the medical records, and then they found the computerized medical records, which Dr. Shipman would, when a patient's family asked him, why did he die? Or why did she die? They were so healthy. He would produce these computerized medical records. And they went through and they proved on these records with a computer forensic scientist that he had actually, almost immediately after killing the victim, in most cases, come home and modified the records so that it looked like the victim had some terminal or undiagnosed but like very obvious illness that he could then go to the families and say like, oh no, they had this illness, this is what killed them, they didn't tell you? Or, oh, we must have missed this illness or something like that. However, his computer, every time he would change somebody's medical records, it would save, right? And so he had digital timestamps of every time he had changed these documents, which ended up proving that he was modifying these people's medical records. They then call Angela Woodruff, who's Kathleen Grundy's daughter, to the stand, and they ask her about her experience with Dr. Shipman when her mother died. And, she tells them a lot of things, but one of the key things she said was, how he had pushed her to cremate her mother. She also mentioned the way that he had handled it and his just lack of compassion, just all of these things, right? And this is all playing into the profile they're building. They had other victims, family members come up too. Some of them where Dr. Shipman was actually in the home when the death happened, and there were relatives there too. He said, yeah, he went and he would call 911, called for emergency services, and they never showed up, but, he did everything he could to try to save my family member, my mother, father, whatever it was. And they pulled phone records and found that Dr. Shipman never actually made any calls to emergency services. He would pretend to make the call, like, hello, 911, what's your emergency? Oh, my patient is dying. They've fallen into this coma and we need help right away, blah, blah, blah. But nobody's on the other line. He didn't actually make the call. And so he would actually fake emergency services calls and just let his patients die. They then got into his drug problems and the drug forgery that he was doing. So this shouldn't come as a surprise because this man has already been convicted for prescription issues, right? But he was prescribing a lot of drugs that never got to his patients because he did mostly home calls, right? So he would prescribe people who didn't need morphine, and he would just never deliver it to them. He would keep it. He did the same thing with patients who were prescribed morphine. He would overprescribe and do the same thing. He even would, in some cases, after a patient had passed away, he would go to the home afterwards to collect leftover drugs for disposal. What do you think that was going to be used for? Just imagine, like, your doctor brings you medicine. Oh yeah, I took this from the other guy that was my patient last week that just died, right? Like, ew. Ugh, I hate it. He was truly disgusting. That's my opinion. I'm sorry. Anyway, so they go through every single victim, all 15, and it's spelled out. And by the end of the trial, they have painted this picture. It showed a very clear pattern of this monster that the prosecution was trying to paint the picture of. Now, the judge, when he sends the jury off to deliberate, he goes through it and specifies all the stuff the way that judges do. He even goes as far as to remind the jury that despite all this evidence, no one actually witnessed Dr. Shipman murder a patient. At least no one that was alive. They never, there was no witness that they could find. So the jury very quickly comes back with a guilty verdict on all 15 counts of murder and the one count of forgery. They knocked that one out at the beginning, So the judge sentences Dr. Shipman to 15 life sentences, plus 4 years for the forgery, which he then turns into, or he commutes to a whole life sentence, which in England, a whole life sentence is life without opportunity for parole. That's basically what it means. So no death penalty. Again, if that's a thing in England, let me know. I'm curious. But so he gives him this life sentence. So one thing that was really interesting to me, there's two things that are really interesting to me about this. The first is that through everything that I read about his trial and all this, there's really not much said about Primrose and the children, right? Like they're kind of kept out of it. And I don't know why that is. It may have been her choice, but what is said about her is that through all of it, even when he was in prison, she stood by him. She defended his innocence. She was like, there is no way that my husband killed all of these people. The 15 that he's convicted of, or anyone really. So she stood by him, and she and the children would visit him in prison up until he died. So Harold Shipman did die of apparent suicide in 2004. He was discovered at 6 a.m. hanging from his prison cell using bed sheets bed sheets and the bars on the window of the cell. So it looked like a suicide. Obviously, there's some people that think he was murdered. There's some people that think, that other things happened, foul play, all this. Like, there's always that kind of speculation when someone dies in prison, right? But after the trial and after he was, put in jail, they did some studies. And this is where it just gets, scary, honestly. So there were a couple of different clinical audits performed by professors, doctors, etc., where they examined the number and the pattern of deaths in his practice compared with those of other similar practitioners, similar patient sets, etc. They found that, first of all, death rates among his elderly patients were significantly higher. He was convicted of killing people between the ages of 41 and I think 90, his youngest victim being 41. They were mostly women that died. They also were clustered at certain times of day, which as that's not a normal thing for doctors. He was also in attendance, he was there for a disproportionately high number of cases. So, this audit actually went on to estimate, so based on all of the deaths that, his patients passed away, things like that, based on the pattern of how he was convicted of killing people, they estimated that he was responsible for the deaths of at least 236 patients over a 24-year period. 236 people. There was another inquiry commission, so totally separate study, different people involved. This one was actually from a high court judge that wanted to do this inquiry, right? So they're examining records of 500 patients who died while in his care. And of those 500 patients, the report said or concluded that it was very likely that he had murdered at least 218 of those patients. Out of all of this, psychologists look at it, the news gets a hold of it, and they decide this man was, honestly, he was addicted to killing. It was also noted that he chose to kill patients in the same way that his mother died when he was 17. With the morphine overdose, and he was so fascinated by the morphine when he was 17. That's the reason he became a doctor, and then he starts killing people like that. Something's off, right? There is. That's my opinion. They also said he may have killed his first victim as early as 1971. This person is 67-year-old Margaret Thompson. She was in his care after having suffered a stroke and was recovering and then just died suddenly. However, the first murder he was convicted of was in 1975. So this may have been going on even longer. Like I said earlier, nobody actually knows how long he was doing this for because he got away with it. And before he died, he never confessed to any of the murders. He never said oh yeah, these are the people that I killed. And he didn't even have to do any hiding of the bodies because the coroner took care of it, which is really scary. So what came out of this ended up being they ended up making some changes in England and just in general to how we look at sudden deaths or sudden deaths of natural causes, especially in elderly people. You almost have to have an autopsy if the person's not already sick. They made these changes because the doctors just had so much power and autonomy, and he was literally able to talk 200 plus families out of having an autopsy, which would have proven that he had in fact killed these people. And most of them even into cremating their loved ones, so they'll never know if he killed them or not. So honestly, I don't think there's any question that he killed these people. Personally, I think that he killed a lot more than the 200 that he was accused of. I also think that this man is just terrifying and really makes me want to research my doctors more. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Tell me your theories, your thoughts, all of the above. Also, just tell me what you thought. This is the first one. I'm planning to do this every week. So I'll drop an episode for you guys every Friday for your weekend knitting or crocheting or whatever you do. I hope you all have a great day. I hope your projects are coming along super well. I know mine is looking pretty fine. Like, look at that. Fisherman's rib, guys. Fisherman's rib. But like I said, I hope you have a great day. And I will see you all soon.